nothing. We were standing watching what was going on. The chief planner...
31 disturbing TV moments, 7 levels. This is the Disturbing TV Moments Iceberg. I've put together this list myself, and we'll start with the weird and well-known incidents and slowly descend into the most troubling footage ever broadcast. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Nasubi. In 1998, Tomoaki Hamatsu agreed to take part in a Japanese reality TV show called A Life in Prizes that would become one of the most controversial, disturbing, and ethically questionable experiments in television history. Tomoaki was an aspiring comedian, selected through an open audition and led to believe he was participating in a challenge that wouldn't be widely broadcast, but could lead to other career opportunities. He was taken to a small, empty apartment, stripped naked, and given only a pen, blank postcards, and magazines. He was tasked to survive solely on prizes won through magazine sweepstakes until he accumulated 1 million yen worth of winnings. That's about $10,000 US. But what Tomoaki didn't know was that his entire experience was being filmed and broadcast to over 15 million viewers every single week. For the next 15 months, he lived in total isolation with no clothes, limited food, and minimal human contact. Viewers came to love him. His constant nudity led the network to cover his intimate area with an eggplant, which the Japanese called Nasubi, his new nickname. Nasubi's struggle for survival was both fascinating and horrifying. He would go weeks without proper food, resorting to eating dog food and uncooked rice. And no matter how hard he tried, he never won any substantial clothing, leaving him naked throughout the ordeal. The psychological toll of the whole experiment was so intense that Nasubi would often experience breakdowns, crying, and screaming, all on camera, and the public loved it. Nasubi became so popular that the show's producers had to move him between different locations to prevent fans from discovering his whereabouts and ruining the entire experiment. But the show's most disturbing moment came when Nasubi finally reached his goal. Nasubi was flown to Korea, then back to Japan, where he was suddenly revealed to a live studio audience, still naked and disoriented. The shock of this revelation and the realization that millions had been watching him suffer was overwhelming for him. The whole ordeal had lasting effects on Nasubi's mental and physical health, including hair loss, body aches, and insomnia. But somehow, despite the trauma, Nasubi has since found purpose in helping victims of the 2011 Fukushima disaster and even climbing Mount Everest. Siegfried and Roy. On October 3, 2003, during a regular TV performance at the Mirage in Las Vegas, Roy Horn of the famous Siegfried and Roy double act was attacked by a 400-pound white tiger named Manticore in front of a packed-out audience. And it just happened to be Roy's 59th birthday to boot. The two of them had been doing the show for a long time by this point, but on this night, Roy deviated from the usual routine, holding a microphone to Manticore's mouth and telling him to say hello to the audience. But the tiger refused, responding by biting Roy's sleeve. Roy tapped on the tiger's nose with the microphone, saying "no, no," which caused Manticore to release his grip. It was a trick that had always worked, but not tonight. As Roy retreated, Manticore lunged at him, knocking him off his feet, biting into Roy's neck, and dragging him off stage, shocking the audience of 1,500 people. The stagehands intervened using fire extinguishers to force the tiger to release him. The incident left Roy with severe injuries, including a torn jugular vein and a crushed windpipe. He also suffered a stroke and was temporarily declared clinically dead during surgery, the worst incident they had in all their years of performing. Even after doctors saved his life, Roy was left partially paralyzed on his left side, requiring extensive rehabilitation. But now, in the aftermath, conflicting narratives emerged about the cause of the attack. The duo did not want to lose their entire careers because of this one incident, so they changed the narrative, maintaining that Manticore was trying to help Roy after sensing he was having that stroke, and the story almost stuck. But then, a former animal handler for the show came forward in 2019 alleging that the official story was a lie and a total cover-up. He claimed that Roy had made crucial mistakes in handling Manticore, which led to the tiger's confusion and subsequent attack. But the story was irrelevant. The incident was more than enough proof that something was wrong. The incident effectively ended Siegfried and Roy's successful Las Vegas show, which had run for 13 years. But despite the traumatic event, Roy urged those in control not to harm the tiger, reportedly saying, "Don't shoot the cat," immediately after the attack. Their request was granted. Manticore was spared, living a long life far away from German magicians. Damar Hamlin's on-field collapse. On January 2nd, 2023, the Buffalo Bills were taking on the Cincinnati Bengals during a Monday Night Football game. At around 8:55 p.m., Bills safety Damar Hamlin tackled Bengals receiver T. Higgins, but then the game took a disturbing, unexpected turn. After the tackle, Hamlin stood up briefly but then collapsed suddenly, unconscious, and seemingly not breathing. Medical personnel immediately rushed to his aid, administering CPR and using an automated external defibrillator to restore his heartbeat on the field. The situation was so distressing that the game was instantly suspended and later postponed as players from both teams were visibly upset, many in tears and kneeling in prayer for his safety. Hamlin was taken by ambulance to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where he was admitted in critical condition. In the days following the incident, there was a huge outpouring of support from fans, players, and the wider sports community. Millions of dollars were donated to Hamlin's charity fundraiser. They all turned out to support him. Hamlin's collapse was later attributed to a rare condition called commotio cordis, which occurs when a blow to the chest causes cardiac arrest. But in just 9 days, Hamlin made a remarkable recovery. He was cleared to return to football in April 2023 despite his traumatic experience. There was no doubt in his mind he was going to be back on the field and nothing would ever stop him. Level 2. Case of a Missing Son. On June 25, 2014, Charles Bethel IV appeared on the Nancy Grace Show to discuss the disappearance of his 12-year-old son, Charlie Bethel V, who had been missing for 11 days. But not too long into the live interview, Nancy Grace informed Charles that his son had been found alive and in the basement of their Detroit home. Charles was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said that he, his wife, the FBI, and the Detroit police had all searched the basement multiple times and never found any sign of Charlie. There was simply no way that he could have been alive, let alone in their own home. But there were many more questions from law enforcement. As it turns out, they had found Charlie barricaded behind boxes and in a large drum in an area they believed he couldn't have constructed on his own. And to add to the suspicion, they also found bedding, soda bottles, and cereal, suggesting he had been there for some time. Pretty soon, it was clear that nothing was as it seemed. The entire time, Charles had been trying to build himself an alibi on TV, but the truth was far more sinister. The investigations revealed serious problems in the home, with both Charles and his wife, Monique Dillard Bethel, later charged with child abuse of their own son. In 2016, Bethel IV pleaded guilty to fourth-degree child abuse, admitting to assaulting his son with extreme force. He was sentenced to 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management classes, and ultimately lost custody of his son. Man admits arson to TV crew. In November 2014, a local news crew rushed out to Rockville, Maryland to cover an active house fire. But when they got to the scene, they were approached by a man willing to talk about what he had witnessed at the blaze. The second the journalist asked what he thought caused the fire, he proudly opened up, admitting that it was him, a man who would only identify himself as Carlos. Nobody had any idea what to do with the fact that this strange man had just willingly admitted to committing a crime on live TV. He even didn't really care much about it, sharing as many details as he could about how he had actually committed the act, and basically incriminating himself on live TV. But almost immediately after the interview came to an end, the authorities took Carlos into custody, having all the evidence they needed to prosecute him. Berlin Poker Heist. On March 6, 2010, the European Poker Tour was being held at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Berlin, Germany. The prize pool at the time was something above 1 million euros, a massive amount that was hugely appealing to the players and others. Around 2:30 p.m., 4 masked men armed with handguns and a machete stormed the venue, targeting the cash desk. They immediately demanded the money, 1 million euro or as much as they could physically carry. But they had committed this entire robbery in front of around 950 players and spectators, sparking a chaotic, widespread panic as participants scrambled for safety, flipping tables and seeking cover. They had also done it right in front of multiple surveillance cameras, live TV cameras, and streaming webcams. Journalists and players were updating the world on the situation through their social media accounts, all while barricading themselves from the attackers. In just a matter of minutes, the entire tournament became total, uncontrollable chaos. Somehow, despite the armed assault, no serious injuries were reported, although several individuals sustained minor injuries during the stampede to escape. And while one security guard managed to wrestle a bag containing a significant portion of the loot from one of the robbers, the gang managed to flee with 242,000 euro in cash. But it didn't last long. The footage turned out to be a blessing for the investigation, with German authorities finding 4 suspects within days after one turned himself in, identifying his accomplices without any hesitation. That's what happens when you have great footage for videos. Kinda like ours. Like and subscribe if you agree. Level 3. Monica Seles Tragedy. On April 30th, 1993, during a quarterfinal match at the Citizen Cup in Hamburg, Germany, Monica Seles, then the world's top-ranked female tennis player, was leading against Magdalena Malieva. But suddenly, a man jumped out from the crowd onto the court and plunged a 9-inch boning knife between Monica's shoulder blades. The attack left a half-inch deep wound, narrowly missing her spine and vital organs. The attacker, Günter Parsche, was an obsessed fan of Monica's rival, Steffi Graf, and his motive was very simple and easy to identify. He wanted to incapacitate Monica so that Graf could regain the world #1 ranking. Although Monica's physical injuries healed within weeks, the psychological trauma lasted much, much longer. She took a 2-year hiatus from professional tennis, struggling with depression and an eating disorder. The incident not only disrupted Monica's career at its peak, but it also raised serious questions about player security in tennis. And the tennis community's response to the incident was mixed. A vote among top players rejected the proposal to freeze Monica's #1 ranking during her absence, with only one player abstaining from the vote. Monica eventually returned to tennis in 1995 and won the 1996 Australian Open. However, she was never able to fully recapture her pre-attack form. The incident remains one of the darkest moments in tennis history, dramatically altering the trajectory of what many believe could have been one of the greatest careers in women's tennis. As for Günter, he received only a 2-year suspended sentence due to psychological issues, serving no jail time despite his very public assault. Xuxa Park Fire. On January 11, 2001, popular Brazilian children's television show Xuxa Park was shooting at a production stage in Rio de Janeiro. The host, Xuxa Meneghel, was performing the show's closing musical number with her dancers when a small fire started in the set's mechanical spaceship, a prop through which Xuxa typically entered and exited the stage. Initially, nobody noticed, but the fire quickly grew out of control, engulfing the entire set within minutes. The studio audience, consisting of about 300 people, mostly children, had to be evacuated rapidly. Miraculously, there were no fatalities, but 26 people were injured, 7 of them in critical condition. Their injuries ranged from smoke inhalation to severe burns. The whole event was captured on video as cameras continued to record, even as technicians fled the scene. This footage was later broadcast on Brazilian news programs, shocking viewers across the country with how close it came to serious tragedy. As for what caused the fire, it turned out to be an electrical short circuit in the spaceship prop. But the incident exposed several safety issues on the set, including locked emergency exits and the presence of highly combustible materials. The stage was simply a disaster waiting to happen. Xuja herself escaped physical harm, but suffered significant psychological trauma from the incident. For the next few months, she frequently visited the injured victims and their families in the hospital during their recovery, but the show would never come back. As a result of the fire, Xuja Park was initially put on hiatus and then ultimately canceled. 8 episodes that had been pre-recorded were never aired out of respect for the victims of the tragedy. The last episode of Xuja Park to be broadcast aired on January 6, 2001, just days before the fire. Padre Adalir de Carli balloon fight. On April 20th, 2008, Padre Adalir Antonio de Carli, a 41-year-old Brazilian Catholic priest, took off from Paranagua at 1 p.m. strapped to a chair attached to 1,000 helium-filled balloons. Jacarli was attempting to break the 19-hour record for the longest flight using party balloons, raising funds for a spiritual rest stop for truckers in Paranagua. Just 3 months earlier, he had managed to complete a similar flight with balloons, proving he could do it. Now he was equipped with survival gear, including a parachute, GPS device, satellite phone, and 5 days' worth of supplies in case something went seriously wrong. As he launched into the air, TV crews came out in great enthusiasm to see the big moment, convinced they were about to watch history unfold. But despite his preparation and previous experiments, Jacarli encountered difficulties almost immediately. When he reached an altitude of 5,800 meters, nearly twice his expected height, Jacarli struggled to use his GPS device and was blown off course by strong winds. His last communication with authorities came at 8:45 p.m. when he was approximately 30 miles off the coast. In this final contact, Jacarli reported feeling very cold but claimed he was fine. He was confident he would make it to his destination, but he never did. Search and rescue efforts were launched by the Brazilian Navy and Air Force but were called off after 9 days when the chances of finding the priest alive were deemed very remote. Tragically, on July 4, 2008, the remnants of popped balloons and the lower half of a human body were discovered floating in the ocean about 100 kilometers from Macaé. DNA tests later confirmed the remains belonged to Padre Jacarli, who had tragically died in his efforts. The priest's ambitious flight and subsequent disappearance captured international attention, with people stunned by what he had done. Despite the tragic outcome, Jacarli never lost sight of his adventurous spirit and his big goal to inspire people. Gary Plauché Incident. It was March 16, 1984, and at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport in Louisiana, Jeffrey Doucette was being escorted to his flight by police. Jeffrey was a 25-year-old karate instructor who was best known for kidnapping and Jody. But as he and the officers passed by a bank of payphones, a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses pulled out a .38 revolver from his boot and fired a single shot at close range, hitting Doucette right in the head. The entire event was captured on camera by a local news crew. Jeffrey fell into a coma and died the very next day. But as for the shooter, it turned out that this was none other than Leon Gary Plauché, the father of the boy who had been abducted. Leon had been tipped off about the arrival and planned the whole thing out carefully, determined to get justice for his son, and he believed he had done it. He was initially charged with second-degree murder, but eventually pleaded no contest to manslaughter. After all, he had achieved what he wanted to achieve. But in a controversial decision, he received a suspended 7-year sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service, serving no jail time for the murder of the man who tormented his only son. But the reaction to the sentencing was mixed at best. Some people believed that Leon deserved some kind of punishment, while others felt that what he did was perfectly understandable. Even Leon maintained that his actions were justified, stating that any parent in a similar situation would have done the same. Jody went on to write a whole book about the incident and its impact on his life, and now works to educate parents about protecting children from predators. Level 4. Jimmy Savile Scandal. For decades, Jimmy Savile was one of the most prominent and recognizable BBC television and radio personalities, known by people all over the UK for his appearances on children's television shows. But when he died in 2011, his once glowing reputation suddenly took a more sinister, unexpected turn that would forever change the landscape of British TV. In October 2012, an ITV documentary aired serious allegations of sexual abuse against Savile, leading to a huge flood of victims coming forward to share their stories. Subsequent investigations uncovered a staggering scale of abuse spanning 6 decades, with victims ranging anywhere from 5 to 75 years old. The Metropolitan Police launched Operation U-Tree, which identified nearly 600 victims of exploitation at the hands of notable figures, with 450 alleging abuse by Savile alone. While he had publicly been a seemingly harmless, slightly kooky personality, Savile's celebrity status and charitable work provided him with unrestricted access to vulnerable individuals in various instances, including hospitals, schools, and BBC studios. And he exploited that trust to his own depraved, sinister ends, committing acts too sick and twisted to even mention. The scandal exposed systemic failures in multiple institutions. The BBC, NHS, and other organizations were criticized for their inability to prevent or address Savile's crimes. In fact, reports revealed that complaints had been made over the years, but they were either ignored or dismissed, largely due to Savile's reputation as a popular entertainer. Everybody wanted to be associated with him, which meant they could overlook the more depraved allegations made.
He put his hand straight up my nightdress, and we weren't allowed to wear pants. So I was, unfortunately I could do nothing. I couldn't stop him, because Broadmoor staff would have punished me if I stood up and said what he was doing. They wouldn't have believed me, and they would have just punished me.
But the revelations had far-reaching consequences. It led to numerous investigations, including those within the BBC and NHS, sparking a nationwide conversation about child protection and the handling of sexual abuse allegations, and a major reckoning for these long-respected institutions. To Catch a Predator, Lewis Conrad Incident. In November 2006, Lewis William Conrad Jr., a 56-year-old assistant district attorney in Texas, became the latest target of a popular NBC show, To Catch a Predator. Conrad had allegedly engaged in explicit exchanges with a decoy posing as a 13-year-old boy. But unlike other suspects who were lured to a sting house, Conrad never appeared at the predetermined location, which was a real problem for authorities. They would have to go get him some other way, by force. So on November 5th, NBC's Dateline crew, along with local police, decided to confront Conrad at his home in Terrell, Texas. They obtained search and arrest warrants, which were rushed and wildly inaccurate. A SWAT team was called to the scene, and they forcibly entered Conrad's house. But as the police entered, Conrad reportedly said, "I'm not gonna hurt anybody," before shooting himself in the head with a Browning .380 pistol. Conrad was airlifted to a Dallas hospital but was pronounced dead within an hour. But the incident instantly sparked controversy. Critics argued that the show's methods bordered on entrapment and that the presence of TV cameras may have caused more stress and even contributed to Conrad's decision to take his own life. In the aftermath, Conrad's sister Patricia filed a $105 million lawsuit against NBC Universal, alleging that the network was responsible for her brother's death and the harm to his reputation. In 2008, NBC settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed amount, describing the agreement as amicable. But it didn't change the fact that the show cost a man his life before anything was truly known. The Jenny Jones Show Tragedy. On March 6, 1995, Jonathan Schmitz, a 24-year-old man from Michigan, appeared on The Jenny Jones Show for a segment all about secret crushes. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, his friend Scott Amager, 32, was also there to reveal his romantic feelings for him. During the taping, Scott shared his fantasies about Jonathan, which involved strawberries, whipped cream, and a hammock.
Okay, you think about you have fantasies about him?
I've had a couple, yeah.
Yeah, you had when he was under the car, you had a fantasy about him.
Yeah, something to do with like brake oil, line snapping, and
I think Scott.
Jonathan, who identified as heterosexual, appeared visibly uncomfortable but tried to laugh it off. But the show was never actually aired due to the tragic events that followed. Just 3 days after the taping, on March 9, 1995, Jonathan found a suggestive note from Scott at his home. It clearly showed Jonathan that Scott had not moved beyond his crush. Enraged and humiliated, Jonathan purchased a shotgun, drove to Scott's mobile home in Lake Orion, Michigan, and confronted him. After confirming that Scott had left the note, Jonathan shot him twice in the chest, killing him instantly. Immediately after the shooting, Jonathan called 911 to confess, telling the authorities that the embarrassment from the television exposure was his sole and only motive.
Ma'am, I think I just shot a man.
Okay, why did you do that?
He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder almost immediately. When the case went to trial, Jonathan's defense team argued that he suffered from bipolar disorder and Graves' disease, but also leaned into the controversial gay panic defense. He claimed that he only lost control and Scott because he made an unwanted advance, thereby making himself a so-called innocent. In 1996, Jonathan was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. His conviction was initially overturned on appeal, but he was retried and found guilty again in 1999. He served nearly 22 years before being released on parole in 2017. Scott's family sued the Jenny Jones Show for wrongful death, initially winning a $25 million judgment, but because the show had no responsibility for what happened after the shoot, this was later overturned on appeal. Dimebag Darrell tragedy. On December 8, 2004, people packed in to the El Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio to see a live performance by Damage Plan, a popular band featuring legendary Pantera guitarist Dimebag Darrell Abbott. But as Damage Plan began their set, 25-year-old Nathan Gale, a former Marine, rushed onto the stage armed with a 9mm Beretta handgun. Gale targeted Abbott, shooting him multiple times in the head at point-blank range, killing him instantly. The attack only continued as Gale fired upon other people present at the venue, all innocents. In the chaos that ensued, 3 more individuals lost their lives, with several others wounded in the totally unprovoked attack. The rampage lasted approximately 5 minutes before Columbus police officer James Neigemeyer arrived on the scene. Neigemeyer, responding without backup, fired a single shot from his 12-gauge shotgun, killing Gale and ending the assault. But even today, the motive behind Gale's actions remains inconclusive, though some speculate it might have been related to Pantera's breakup or possible mental health issues. It's believed he might have been suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the music world, particularly the metal community. Thousands attended Abbott's public memorial, with Eddie Van Halen donating his iconic Bumblebee guitar to be buried with Abbott. 20 years later, Dimebag Darrell's legacy continues to be celebrated by fans and fellow musicians alike, but the incident forever changed the dynamic between performers and audience members in the metal world. Albert Dryden shooting. In 1991, Albert Dryden, a former steel worker, built a bungalow on his rural property in County Durham, England, without obtaining proper planning permission. For the next 3 years, he would find himself in the middle of an unending legal dispute with the Derwentshire District Council, a dispute that Albert ultimately lost. On June 20, 1991, council officials, including planning officer Harry Collinson, arrived at Dryden's property to enforce a demolition order. But this was no ordinary visit. BBC television crews were filming the event for the regional news program Look North. They had no idea of how deadly this was about to get. After the initial enforcing of the order failed, Albert grabbed a .455 Webley Mark VI revolver. Harry, seemingly unaware of the imminent danger this man posed, asked the camera crew to get a shot of Albert's gun. Before they could, Albert fired, shooting Harry in the chest at point-blank range. In the ensuing chaos, Albert continued firing, wounding a BBC reporter in the arm and a police constable in the butt.
We were standing watching what was going on. The chief planner was trying to persuade the chap to move out the way and let the digger go in. And then a shot rang out, the chief planner fell to the ground, and I felt a shot in the arm, and I've clearly been shot here in the arm.
He also attempted to shoot a council's solicitor, all to put an end to the opposition to his bungalow. The shocking murder was captured on camera and broadcast on live television, making it one of the most notorious crimes ever to hit Northeast England. The ensuing standoff lasted no time at all. Albert was outnumbered and outgunned against the armed police, reluctantly surrendering himself. During his trial in 1992, the jury rejected his defense overwhelmingly, finding him guilty of murder, attempted murder, and wounding with intent. Albert was sentenced to life imprisonment. After serving 26 years in prison, Albert suffered a stroke and was released on compassionate grounds in 2017. He spent his final months in a care home where he died on September 15, 2018, at the age of 78. Level 5. Pizza Bomber Heist, Brian Wells. On October 28, 2003, Brian Wells, a 46-year-old pizza delivery man, walked into a PNC bank in Erie, Pennsylvania wearing a collar bomb. He handed the teller a note which explained that if he was not given $250,000, the bomb would detonate and he would die. But Brian left with only $8,702 and was quickly apprehended by police on the way out. There was no question that the heist had been a resounding disaster. Only Brian was seemingly not part of any heist. He told the police that he had been forced to commit the robbery by 3 black men who had attached the bomb to his neck. But as he sat handcuffed in a parking lot waiting for the bomb squad to remove it, the device started ticking. As the police ran, Brian began to panic and freak out until the device detonated, killing him instantly. But in the aftermath of his death, the investigation revealed a shocking twist. Wells was not an innocent victim at all. He was an active participant in the plot. The authorities discovered that the heist was part of a grander and more complicated plan. The masterminds didn't care about the money from the heist. It would simply be used to pay for a hitman. The real goal was to murder the father of one of the masterminds, all to claim an inheritance. The plot was overly complicated, involving a scavenger hunt with a series of timed tasks that Wells was supposed to complete to defuse the bomb. However, it was later determined that the bomb could never have been safely removed, making Wells' survival impossible. He was nothing more than an expendable distraction. The case took years to unravel, complicated by the deaths of key witnesses and the mental health issues of some conspirators. But eventually in 2008, the other masterminds were sentenced to 45 years in prison or a life sentence plus 30 years. The San Diego Tank Rampage. On May 17, 1995, Sean Timothy Nelson, a 35-year-old U.S. Army veteran, finally hit his breaking point. Sean had been struggling with financial difficulties, substance abuse, and personal setbacks for years. And no matter how hard he tried, he could not get back on his feet. So, at 6:30 p.m., Sean entered the California Army National Guard Armory looking for something he could use to express his frustrations. After failing to start 2 tanks, he successfully activated the 57-ton M60A3 Patton tank. Suddenly, Sean crashed through the armory gate and drove the tank through residential neighborhoods. For the next 23 minutes, Sean crushed over 40 vehicles, destroyed utility poles, fire hydrants, and traffic lights, leaving a trail of destruction and cutting power to approximately 5,100 homes. As Sean maneuvered the tank onto the highway, police pursued, but they were largely powerless against the intensely armored vehicle. The The chase was captured live by news helicopters, creating a surreal scene reminiscent of a war zone as a tank rolled its way along a public highway. But the rampage came to an end when Sean attempted to cross into the northbound lanes of SR-163. The tank had been unstoppable up to this point, but it became stuck on a concrete median barrier, losing one of its tracks. 4 police officers climbed onto the immobilized tank and opened the hatch using bolt cutters, finally getting the man who caused untold damage on the city. But when Sean refused to surrender and continued trying to free the tank, one officer leaned in and fired a shot, striking Nelson in the neck. Sean was extracted from the tank and taken to Sharp Memorial Hospital, where he later died from his injuries. Remarkably, despite the extensive property damage estimated at $149,201, equivalent to $289,855 in 2023, Sean was the only fatality in the incident. But the city now had to reckon with how easy it was for a totally unhinged man to steal a tank from a U.S. armory. Lauren Giddings. On June 30th, 2011, the torso of Lauren Teresa Giddings, a 27-year-old law school graduate, was discovered in a trash can outside her apartment complex in Macon, Georgia. Not long afterwards, the rest of her remains were discarded in a dumpster on the Mercer University campus where she had attended law school. Someone had it out for Lauren, but the question of who was harder to explain. The case immediately hit the news coverage, with her neighbor and former classmate Steve and Mark McDaniel discovering on camera that Lauren's remains had been found.
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
But his strange calmness was deeply concerning for many, who immediately grew suspicious. As the investigation progressed, crucial evidence emerged. Police found a hacksaw with traces of blood in the apartment complex's maintenance closet. And in Stephen's apartment, they discovered packaging for the exact same type of hacksaw, stolen underwear belonging to Lauren, and keys that gave him access to both the maintenance room and Lauren's apartment. There was no doubt that Stephen did it, but how? In the early hours of that fateful Sunday, Stephen used a master key to enter Lauren's apartment. Wearing a mask and gloves, he strangled her to death in her bedroom. The following day, he dismembered her body in the bathroom using a hacksaw and littered the pieces on the campus they shared. His motive was simply that he wanted to commit the perfect murder, targeting the woman who had once rejected his romantic advances. On August 2nd, 2001, Stephen was charged with first-degree murder and later accepted a plea deal, confessing to the crime in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Despite extensive searches, the rest of Giddings' remains have never been found. Good Guy's hostage crisis. At approximately 1 p.m. on April 4th, 1991, 4 armed Asian males entered a Good Guy's electronics store in Sacramento, California, taking 41 employees and customers hostage. The hostage takers were armed with just 3 pistols and a shotgun, but they didn't want money, electronics, or anything. All they wanted was to gain notoriety and express frustration with their lives in the United States. Over the next 8 hours, the gunmen found themselves standing off with the authorities, locked in negotiations. They made various demands, including millions of dollars, bulletproof vests, a helicopter to Thailand, and even 1,000-year-old ginseng roots. And the whole time, the crisis was broadcast live on television. As negotiations with law enforcement dragged on, the hostage takers became increasingly erratic and violent. They forced hostages to play deadly games and began shooting at security cameras. But the situation hit a new level when they shot 2 hostages in the leg, prompting law enforcement to plan a full-scale assault. At approximately 9:51 p.m., after one of the gunmen began executing bound hostages, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department Special Enforcement Detail stormed the store. In the ensuing chaos, 3 hostages and 3 of the 4 hostage takers were killed. The 4th gunman was captured, and 14 additional hostages were injured in the chaos. To this day, the Good Guys hostage crisis remains the largest hostage rescue operation in U.S. history and serves as a case study for law enforcement agencies in managing complex hostage situations. Space Shuttle Challenger crash. On January 28, 1986, NASA was ready to make history once again. The Space Shuttle Challenger would be heading into space, and for the first time, NASA was sending a civilian, a schoolteacher named Krista McAleef. The coverage was more extensive than usual, with people all over the world tuning in to watch history being made. But at 11:39 a.m., just 73 seconds after liftoff from Cape Canaveral, Florida, the shuttle suddenly exploded, disintegrating over the Atlantic Ocean, resulting in the deaths of all 7 crew members aboard. What should have been a joyous day became an unrelenting tragedy. The cause of the disaster was traced to the failure of 2 rubber O-rings that sealed a joint between the 2 lower segments of the right solid rocket booster. The unusual cold temperature on the launch day, around -7 degrees Celsius, had stiffened the O-rings, reducing their ability to seal properly. As the Challenger ascended, hot pressurized gases from within the booster leaked through the failed seal. Soon after, a flame plume had formed, eventually burning through the attachment connecting the booster to the external tank. By 73 seconds into the flight, the right booster separated entirely, causing the shuttle to veer off course. The sudden change in trajectory subjected Challenger to aerodynamic forces it wasn't designed to withstand. The whole thing went up in a fireball. Contrary to initial beliefs, the crew cabin remained intact after the breakup. It continued to ascend, reaching an altitude of about 19 kilometers before falling back to Earth. But the cabin impacted the ocean's surface at approximately 333 kilometers per hour, instantly killing any crew members who may have survived the initial breakup. The Challenger disaster led to a 32-month hiatus in the shuttle program and prompted a thorough review of NASA's safety culture and decision-making processes. Level 6. The disappearance of Lai Hui Li. On July 6, 2020, Lai Hui Li, a 53-year-old woman from Hangzhou, China, was reported missing by her husband Shu. He was devastated, offering a reward of 100,000 yuan for information about his wife's whereabouts and participating in multiple television interviews pleading for help in finding her. Police conducted an extensive search, reviewing over 6,000 hours of surveillance footage and interviewing residents in 379 households within the couple's residential complex. And yet, despite these efforts, there was no trace of Lai ever leaving the premises. With nowhere else to look, investigators made the grim decision to drain the community's septic tank. Inside, they found traces of human tissue, and when they ran the DNA, they found that it was directly linked to Lai herself. What initially appeared to be a mysterious disappearance soon unraveled into a gruesome case, and one man was more suspicious than any other. On July 23, 2020, Shu was arrested. He confessed to the murder almost immediately, but the details that emerged were horrifying. According to prosecutors, on the night of July 4th, Shu drugged Lai's milk with sleeping pills, suffocating her with a pillow and then dismembering her body in the bathroom. He disposed of the remains by flushing some parts down the toilet and discarding others in the garbage. The motive for the crime was reportedly rooted in ongoing family conflicts, including disagreements over property ownership and their daughter's education. Shu's trial began on May 14, 2021 at the Hangzhou Intermediate People's Court, where he faced charges for the premeditated murder of his wife. He was ultimately sentenced to death for his crime and eventually executed in 2023. The hijacking of Bus 174. On June 12, 2000, Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento, a 21-year-old homeless man with a troubled past, boarded Bus 174 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Every day, dozens of locals got on this same bus to go to work in the city. But today, they wouldn't make it to work. Sandro pulled a gun and announced that the bus was being robbed. A passenger quickly alerted the police, leading to the bus being surrounded by law enforcement, media crews, and onlookers, all of whom wanted to see how the police would handle the situation. But all negotiations failed miserably, with Sandro's demands for weapons and a new driver being quickly rejected. He felt he had no choice but to threaten the lives of the hostages until the police took him seriously. By this point, news crews had every angle covered, turning their live coverage of the event into a movie-level ordeal. It took 4 hours before the siege was brought to an end. Sandro had enough, deciding to leave the bus with a hostage to protect himself, but the police were ready to end this once and for all. As they tried to intervene, one officer accidentally shot and killed the hostage, confusing Sandro just enough to take him down, pushing him into the back of a police car. Sandro did not survive the incident. He was suffocated to death by police officers in the back of the vehicle. The situation officers claimed was a botched attempt at sedation, but the circumstances remain controversial even today. It was later discovered that Sandro was one of the survivors of the infamous Candelaria massacre, which saw real police opening fire on homeless young people, once again drawing the public's attention to Brazilian police's continued mishandling of critical situations. Sydney Siege. At 9:44 a.m., on an otherwise typical December day at the Lint Cafe in Sydney, Australia, Manharan Monas, an Iranian-born Australian citizen, walked in, pulled a gun, and took 18 people hostage. Monas had a history of criminal charges and mental instability, but he also had a mission to achieve here. He forced hostages to hold up a black Islamic banner in the cafe window, claiming to be acting on behalf of the Islamic State, though his true motives remained unclear. For all they knew, he was just making that up. The siege lasted for 16 hours, during which 5 hostages managed to escape. Throughout the ordeal, police adopted a contain and negotiate strategy, hoping to try and resolve the problem with diplomacy, not weapons or force. But at approximately 2:03 p.m. on December 16th, Monas fired his first shot. 10 minutes later, he executed cafe manager Tory Johnson to send a message. By this point, police could no longer contain or negotiate. They had to act.
The police are being tested. The public is being tested. But whatever the test, we will face it head on.
The police stormed the building, but during the raid, Monas was killed, and tragically, so was a hostage who got caught in the crossfire. 3 people died, including Monas himself, but 3 other hostages and a police officer were injured in the crossfire. In the aftermath, questions were raised about the police response and decision-making during the crisis. The contain and negotiate strategy was widely criticized as being inconceivably stupid. Even a coroner's inquest in 2017 ruled that police should have entered the cafe sooner, specifically after Monas fired his first shot. The event is remembered annually, with memorial services held in Martin Place to honor the victims and the resilience of the Sydney community. Daniel Victor Jones incident. Daniel Victor Jones, a 40-year-old maintenance worker from Long Beach, California, had just been diagnosed with cancer. He was already HIV positive and struggling to pay for his medical treatment, but now he was all but certain he was going to die, one way or another. He had nothing to lose. On April 30th, 1998, at around 3 p.m., Daniel drove his pickup truck to the interchange between the Harbor Freeway and the Century Freeway. He climbed out, retrieved a loaded shotgun, and started pointing it at passing vehicles. The police quickly mobilized to contain the situation, closing both freeways. But Daniel called 911 himself, expressing his distress over mistreatment by health maintenance organizations, or HMOs, and the difficulties he faced in accessing medical care. During the 50-minute standoff, Jones unfurled a banner reading, "HMOs are in it for the money. Live free, love safe, or die," which he displayed for news helicopters covering the incident live. He also threw a satchel containing a pre-recorded videotape over the freeway wall, which would later be recovered by authorities. As the situation escalated, Jones set his truck on fire with a Molotov cocktail. He emerged from the vehicle engulfed in flames, managing to extinguish himself, but leaving his dog Gladys to perish in the burning truck. In a final shocking act broadcast live on television, Jones retrieved his shotgun from the truck, placed it under his chin, and fatally shot himself at approximately 3:50 p.m. The graphic nature of the incident stunned viewers, especially as it interrupted afternoon programming. Jones' it was a protest against the healthcare system he felt had failed him. The videotape he left behind revealed his struggles with his illnesses and his decision not to continue fighting. But the message was clear. He wanted to highlight issues surrounding healthcare access and the responsibility of media to cover it. Issues that continue to be relevant today, as we've seen in more recent incidents. Level 7. Munich Olympics Massacre. On September 5th, 1972, during the Summer Olympics in Munich, West Germany, 8 members of the Palestinian militant group Black September infiltrated the Olympic Village. At approximately 4:30 a.m., the terrorists scaled a 2-meter fence and forced their way into the building housing the Israeli delegation. Wrestling referee Josef Gottfried and coach Moshe Weinberg attempted to resist the takeover, but Weinberg was shot and killed instantly. The terrorists then took 9 Israeli athletes hostage, demanding the release of 200 Palestinian prisoners in Israel and 2 members of the German Red Army faction. As news of the attack spread, the world watched in shock as the situation unfolded further. The Olympics were suspended for a day as negotiations began. In addition to the Palestinian release, the terrorists demanded safe passage to Cairo with their hostages. German authorities agreed, but they were secretly planning an ambush at Fürstenfeldbruck Air Base. Unfortunately, that rescue attempt was just about to make the whole situation much, much worse. The German snipers were inexperienced and ill-equipped, and there was a lack of proper coordination across the board. When the helicopters carrying the terrorists and hostages arrived at the airbase, a shootout ensued. Realizing they had been tricked, the terrorists opened fire. In the chaos that followed, all 9 Israeli hostages were killed, a German police officer lost his life, and 5 of the 8 terrorists were killed while 3 were captured. The tragic event ended around 12:30 a.m. on September 6th, after lasting nearly 20 hours. The Munich massacre marked the first time a global audience witnessed a terrorist attack unfold on live television, and forced the Olympics to improve its security. North Hollywood Bank Shootout. On February 28, 1997, in Los Angeles, California, 2 heavily armed bank robbers, Larry Eugene Phillips Jr. and Emil Dechabal Matasereno, attempted to rob a Bank of America branch in North Hollywood. At 9:17 a.m., the robbers entered the bank wearing body armor and carrying modified automatic weapons. They announced their presence by firing shots into the ceiling to intimidate customers and staff, forcing their way into the vault, only to discover much less money than expected. It turns out the bank's delivery schedule had changed, a critical detail they would have known had they fully planned the heist out. Larry and Emil exited the bank with approximately $303,305, but they were immediately confronted by LAPD officers. Instead of surrendering, the robbers opened fire, initiating a brutal 44-minute gun battle. The police found themselves severely outgunned. The robbers' weapons could fire up to 10 rounds per second, easily penetrating police vehicles and body armor. And the officers, armed primarily with handguns, struggled to contain the situation. Larry and Emil fired over 1,100 rounds, injuring 11 officers and 8 civilians. And when they got the chance, the robbers attempted to flee, but Emil betrayed his fellow thief, taking off in a vehicle and leaving Larry behind on foot. As the police closed in, Larry began to realize he had no chance of escaping this mess he had created. With news helicopters covering the whole thing, Larry was cornered and severely wounded by gunfire. He decided, in front of the world, to take his own life. Emil didn't get much further. While the armor had protected him, he had been hit 29 times in his unprotected legs and bled to death after attempting to hijack a civilian vehicle. The North Hollywood shootout had exposed the inadequacy of police equipment against heavily armed criminals. As a result, the LAPD received 600 M16 military rifles from the Pentagon to better prepare for similar situations in the future. The Station Nightclub Fire. On February 20th, 2003, in West Warwick, Rhode Island, the band Jack Russell's Great White were performing at the Station nightclub, a small but hugely popular venue in town. But before they ended their first song, the situation turned deadly. Pyrotechnics used as part of the band's act ignited flammable acoustic foam lining the walls and ceiling near the stage. Within seconds, the flames spread rapidly all across the ceiling and walls. Initially, much of the audience thought the fire was part of the show, but panic quickly ensued as the situation worsened. Smoke was visible at exit doorways within a minute, and flames broke through the roof in less than 5. The nightclub, which lacked a sprinkler system, became engulfed in flames in just 6 minutes. And despite having 4 exits, most patrons attempted to escape through the main entrance, creating a deadly bottleneck. The narrow hallway leading to that one exit became blocked as people desperately pushed to get out, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries. It just so happened that a cameraman for a local TV news company was doing a report on the club's safety protocols that night and captured the entire ordeal. Firefighters arrived quickly, but the fire's rapid spread made rescue efforts extremely challenging, with the building's partial roof collapse making it even harder to do anything to save those involved. 100 people died, with another 230 seriously injured. In the aftermath, investigations revealed multiple factors contributing to the high death toll. The use of flammable foam, lack of sprinklers, overcrowding with 462 people crammed into a space licensed for 404, limited and poorly designed exits, and inadequate emergency response planning. The tragedy led to a lot of legal consequences and prompted changes in fire safety regulations. The nightclub owners and the band's tour manager faced criminal charges, and civil lawsuits resulted in millions of dollars in settlement.